Thanks very much, Lorraine, and the organisers for inviting me to speak here. Okay, so my name is Sarah, and I work here at the Tyndall Centre at the University of Manchester. And when I was thinking about this problem, I decided that I'd try and take you on a bit of a little personal journey through my life, as it were. So you might have to forgive me these 10 minutes of confession, as it were. So in my biog, it says that I trained as a chemical engineer, and now I do research that focuses on people in low carbon technology, stakeholders in low carbon technology. And so I was a chemical engineer for a couple of years, and this was 20 odd years ago. And I realised that I was a really bad chemical engineer. So I could do the sums, but at the time, chemical engineering, it was about minimum compliance kind of thing. You didn't really look, the environment was sort of something that was a very small part of what we did, and was well illustrated by the day an pollution inspector came to visit the place where I was working to look at a particular process. And there was a power cut, so he got stuck in the lift for 2.5 hours while they shut this process down. And events like that sort of made me think that actually this wasn't the place for me. So I then there used to be a part of Manchester called Hume, which in the late 80s, early 90s had deck access blocks that had been built in the 60s when in slum clearances. So they built these deck access flats, and I mean, yeah, it was to give people who lived in these houses, modern conveniences like indoor toilets, central heating, good things. But actually, as a housing scheme for families, it didn't work very well. So by the 90s, it was quite a sort of an anarchistic community, very much outside Manchester society in a sense. So they went through a process of a second, what they called slum clearances, I guess, community regeneration. And as part of that, I was involved in a housing co-op called Homes for Change. And this again, 20 odd years ago, spent 7 years developing this mixed-use scheme of flats and workspace. And we had a green brief that ensured that these flats that were built were very energy efficient. They were designed to make best use of passive gain. They had low-E glass, which at the time not many places had, very thick walls, in a real community space. And so coming forward 20 years, it's because of actions of individuals coming together and saying, actually, there can be a better alternative that, and schemes like Homes for Change, like Beds Ed in London, like lots of other pockets of community activism. We now have policies in the UK that from 2016 all new homes will be zero carbon homes, and actually if you do the sums, those homes will maybe cost £5,000 more to build than a conventional high carbon home, as it were. So it makes sense from every point of view. But you look at the UK housing stock, and we've got some of the worst housing stock in Europe, and so despite this this zero carbon homes policy, we'll still have by 2050 90-odd% of houses that aren't zero carbon homes, that are 40, half of those roughly are what we call hard to treat. They've got solid wall insulation, or solid walls rather, quite hard to insulate. They might not have any lofts, they might be high rise, they might be off mains gas thing. So we've got a massive legacy, housing stock legacy that needs to have something to do done about it. And you fast forward to me now, and I live in one of these hard to treat homes, because when I left Homes for Change, I thought, actually, I'm informed. I feel I have a responsibility to do something about climate change. I value nature, whatever. I'm gonna buy a hard to treat house, and actually we can retrofit it and make it more energy efficient. And actually it turns out that that's harder than you think. The price of solid wall insulation on our house, we were looking at £10,000+, which when you work part-time, blah, 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 I'm trying to persuade my partner, well, shall we invest this £10,000 in making our house more energy efficient? It's a bit like, well, what £10,000? And you're right, okay. And that's, I'm an informed person who works in climate change. And if we, again, look forward to 2050, out of, say, 25 million homes in the UK, 23 million of those homes will need to be retrofitted to a high standard of energy efficiency if we are going to mitigate dangerous climate change. So it kind of starts to make you realise that it's a question of scale kind of thing. Okay, we are all individuals, but that's a lot of houses and a lot of individuals. The work that I do now is a lot on kind of low carbon supply. And again, 10 years ago when we started looking at low carbon energy scenarios, in our scenarios we could say, okay, you might have a little bit of nuclear or some CCS, and we'd go out to speak to people to kind of explore perceptions of different supply side technologies, and you could maybe trade one technology off against another. Kind of fast forward to 10 years and we need everything. We need carbon capture and storage, we need nuclear, we need renewables, we need a massive kind of wide-scale deployment of low-side carbon technologies on the supply side, low-carbon technologies on the demand side, and it goes beyond what I would say was individual action. It needs more than that kind of thing. It needs concerted government action, and it needs the engineers, it needs the technology. And so I kept thinking, well, what's the role of individual responsibility in all this? And then it comes back to, I suppose, why the reason why people kind of take action in the first place. Do you look at your governments, or do you look at the businesses around you? Do you think they're doing enough? And if you can say to yourself, actually, no, I don't think they're doing enough to address this important problem that I feel needs addressing, then actually where you have individual responsibility is by saying, you're not doing enough and I'm going to try and do something about it. So is it opposing kind of fracking for shale gas here in the UK? Or opposing kind of divestments in fossil fuels kind of thing? Is that the role for individual responsibility? Is turning around and saying, is kind of engaging in that kind of activism that says, actually, this isn't good enough and we have to do something about it. We're also, back in December, Tyndall hosted a conference called the Radical Plan. And I was struck by two things. I was struck by lots of things, but the two take-home things that I really took away from that was there was a guy called Neil who worked for Belfast Fire Service. And a few years ago, he looked at Belfast, the fire station in which he worked at. It was a very poorly built building, very energy efficient. Their fuel bills were very high, suffered from sick building syndrome, and was kind of very poorly embedded in its community. And he said to himself, well, actually, we can do something about that. So he put together a sustainability plan. He applied for the money from the fire service in order to renovate that building. Turns out there was no one in Ireland who could make the particular windows that they needed. So they set up a social enterprise in the local area in order to provide employment, but also to kind of provide them with the kit that they needed in order to make their fire station more sustainable, more energy efficient, and so on. And as well as being a fireman, this guy then went out. They rolled out this plan across the whole of kind of Belfast fire station, and that was the kind of an amazing example of one person saying, well, this isn't being done for me, it's important that it's done, so I'm going to go out and do it. And then the next thing that struck me at this conference was politicians saying, well, actually, as researchers, you're very good at telling me what I'm doing wrong, but you're not so good at kind of providing me with those examples of what we should be doing that's right. And so I'd say then, just to kind of conclude, that we also have individual responsibility as researchers, as scientists who know this problem, and that's to kind of not to kind of sit on our research, but to actually kind of go out and take responsibility for disseminating that work, take kind of responsibility for ensuring that that work has impact, because realistically, me cycling around on my bike or telling my kids to turn the lights off isn't really going to mitigate dangerous climate change. But if I kind of go out and try and spread the message of my work more widely, then maybe I'll have a better chance doing it that way. Thank you.